The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
She said he did it, and her testimony was compelling. He said he didn't do it, and his testimony was credible. So after one of the most disquieting, shameful, and exhausting episodes in this hideous political era, if not all of American history, the angry denials and defiance of Judge Brett Kavanaugh in his last stand before 21 senators was apparently just enough to move him to the final stage of confirmation. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Is Brett Kavanaugh a sexual predator or even a serial sexual predator, a criminal guilty of multiple crimes or at least one, which would surely land him in prison? Because that's the proposition the Democrats have advanced, and in the end, after the seemingly sincere testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and Kavanaugh then alternating between angry, accusatory attacks on Democrats and unconstrained emotion at the wringer he and his family have been put through, it was a lack of evidence of the alleged sexual attack 36 years ago that allowed Judge Kavanaugh to advance the ball past the Senate Judiciary Committee to the red zone, the entire Senate, where he'll hope for the 50 votes he'll need for confirmation. Now, in a perverse way, the unsubstantiated charge by a second accuser, Debbie Ramirez, and an entirely incredible charge by one Julie Swetnick that Kavanaugh was present and participated in as many as 10 gang rapes may have ultimately unmasked the Democrats' agenda and their campaign, whether orchestrated or not, to do whatever it takes to kill this nomination. With these hard-to-believe accusations mounting, the Democrats appeared as the boy who cried wolf, so that even charges that might be credible now appear entirely incredible. As far as the ridiculous charge by Ms. Swetnick, one wonders quite simply why a woman who witnessed multiple gang rapes would keep going to parties with the same people over and over. But as we look back on this confirmation process, perhaps it wasn't a good idea for 42 Democrat senators to trumpet their intent to vote against Kavanaugh minutes after his nomination was announced by President Trump. Perhaps it wasn't such a good idea to keep Blasey Ford's accusation private until the last minute, making it look like little more than a political hit job. Perhaps it wasn't such a good idea to make such obvious moves to delay the vote, like calling throughout Thursday's hearing for an FBI investigation into all the charges by the three women after Kavanaugh has already been subjected to six FBI background checks, and the certainty that events such as those alleged with no corroborating evidence will result in little more than a regurgitation of testimony provided either before the Senate or in the media or both, making it again look like nothing more than stalling for time and thereby allowing Kavanaugh to twist in the wind even more and opening things up for even more allegations. But while the Democrats have forever tarred Brett Kavanaugh, think of what they've done to Christine Blasey Ford. The fact that she had 2 front doors built into her house should be sufficient evidence that this woman suffered through some horrific episode. She's a woman who's obviously been traumatized and who insisted on privacy when she wrote to Senator Dianne Feinstein, only to have that privacy shattered by leaks that have now made her life a public spectacle, a martyr for the cause, collateral damage in the Democrats' war against the nominee and President Trump. It's hard not to empathize with Christine Ford Blasey's apparent plight, but both parties were 100% certain of what they said. She that he attacked her, he that he did not. But the bottom line is that the Democrats cannot prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. None of the people Blasey Ford has said were at that gathering in question at an unspecified location on an unspecified date have confirmed even that they attended such a gathering, not to mention knowing what happened there. That includes Blasey Ford's friend Leland Kaiser, who says she never knew or even met Brett Kavanaugh. Perhaps the fact that the Democrats reversed the fundamental premise of our system of justice, presuming Kavanaugh guilty until he can prove his innocence, which is as impossible as proving him guilty, looked like nothing more than a desperate attempt by Democrats to derail a nominee in the last 2 minutes of the game. The Democrats essentially implied that Kavanaugh is an out-of-control alcoholic, or was at the time of the alleged attack. As per the grandstanding of Senator Cory Booker, they were reduced to focusing on Kavanaugh's high school yearbook, for heaven's sake, and turning the advice and consent hearing to talk of teenage pranks and flatulence and tongue-in-cheek F-bombs made them look like they were just grabbing at straws. And perhaps it isn't a good idea for Democrats to make explicit threats from the likes of Brian Fallon, press secretary for Hillary Clinton, who said after Thursday's hearing in a tweet that if Kavanaugh is confirmed, he, quote, will not serve for life, unquote. That is a threat. Now, it's hard to remember, but this is a body, the Senate, that confirmed both constitutionalist Antonin Scalia and progressive Ruth Bader Ginsburg virtually unanimously, back when both parties accepted the fact that the president who won a national election should get to pick who he wants on the court, absent extraordinary circumstances. Indeed, the word august no longer applies to what was once called the world's greatest deliberative body. Now, I know this is hard to believe, but if you think this was bad, when the court is moving from a bare conservative majority to a more solid conservative majority, think about what it'll be like if one of the current progressive justices, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, dies, and Trump gets to appoint someone who will all but guarantee an overwhelmingly constitutional court for a generation or more. God help us what the Democrats will do then. That could well resemble the words of the singer Barry McGuire that we are on the eve of destruction. Quick break, and then we're back for a look at the crowded field of Democrats planning to take on President Trump in 2020.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, you can't tell the players without a scorecard. That may be the operative phrase for the quantity of Democrats lining up to take on each other and then Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. The number of Democrats seeking the nomination could well exceed the 17 who threw their hats into the ring for the 2016 Republican presidential nomination. And here to help us try and sort them all out is Joe Schaeffer, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Tim.
Well, listen, Joe, I've broken up the potential candidates into 3 or 4 groups, which I call the class of 2016 for the potential candidates we got to know a couple of years ago or further back, the class of 18, the ones we've gotten to know this year, the class of 20 or 2020 for the ones we'll likely get to know in the months ahead, and the wild cards. So let's start with the class of 16, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. What do you make of their prospects?
That's a fun class, isn't it? The first thing that jumps out to me with that is, I don't know about the word old, but they've been tried before in many ways. Elizabeth Warren hasn't been tried as a national candidate, but she's been on the scene for a while. To me, they're establishment. Elizabeth Warren, I know, has a foot in both camps, but Joe Biden is established. I would even say Bernie Sanders, who ran as someone, a progressive, like to overthrow the Democratic establishment. He's sort of establishment himself. He's been in politics for a very long time. Is he a change agent? Yes, he's running on a hard left platform that the progressives love, but is he fresh blood? Is he a fresh face? No, he's not. Joe Biden is pure establishment. I don't believe the progressives who just are just running the grassroots of the Democrat Party now are going to accept a Joe Biden. Probably among those 3, I think Elizabeth Warren would be the one that would have a leg up because, like I said, she has a foot in both camps. She appeals to the more establishment types because she's been in office for a while. They're comfortable with that. She's ensconced with them, but she's also very favorable to the progressive left for a lot of things she said. Again, I have no idea how she's going to win in the heartland. Apparently, Democrats don't think about these things, which is what you need to do to win the elections. But among those 3, I would say Elizabeth Warren would have the best shot at the nomination because she would appeal to both those camps in a way that the other 2 would not.
Yeah, and people tend to forget that even though he was vice president, Joe Biden ran twice for president and really fell flat on his face, failed to exceed 1%, dropped out early, once in disgrace. Let's move to the class of 2018, which I would call 3 senators, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand, who've emerged this year. Which of these emerging faces do you think stands the best chance of advancing beyond the initial cut?
Well, I don't like any of the 3 of them, and I'm not saying that from my own personal views. I just don't like them as candidates. I don't see how they're going to have any kind of national appeal, especially Cory Booker. He's been around for so long. He was hyped up as some kind of future, but that was several years ago, and he never caught on. He's never really done anything that has advanced his appeal in any way. Kirsten Gillibrand, she just says so many crazy things. She doesn't sound, frankly, like she has any depth to her at all. This Kavanaugh thing, it's all about, I believe her, I believe the woman. And she says things like that all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, is there more here? Do you have more than this? And,
It's as if we're hanging on her every word, that if she personally believes this allegation, then that settles the issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. And that seems to be what she says about everything, as far as I've paid attention to her. And, that does appeal to these progressives who are going to be voting in Democratic primaries. So who knows, maybe there'll be enough for them to do that. But again, it's a disaster on a national scale. She would be a terrible candidate for the Democrats. Kamala Harris, I know that they're pushing her. A lot of the establishment seems to be currying favor with her because they see her as a rising star. Does she excite progressives in California and across the nation? I'm not sure. Again, has she done anything to stand out? I'm not sure. The problem the Democratic Party has is if they go to that first class you were talking about, which is maybe the veterans who've been around a while, or if you go with the new faces, it's all bad. You're not winning in the heartland with these people. And the question is, what is the worst direction for the Democratic Party? Stick with the old faces and lose, or go in a new direction and lose and maybe be really set back because they need to make changes in their party? So the wrong changes or not making any changes at all, which is the more disastrous scenario for them? Either way, it's going to be bad.
We're with Joe Schaeffer, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com, chewing the fat about the potential huge field of Democrats who want to take on Donald Trump in 2020. So we've talked about the classes of 16 and 18, so to speak. Now let's move to the class of 2020, people who have been in the public spotlight, but who are likely to magnify their presence in the next couple of years. One of them, former Obama Attorney General Eric Holder, the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, and the current governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who famously said America was never that great. Do any of them stand a chance of winning the Democratic nomination for president?
Well, among all the names we've discussed so far, I would say these three have the least chance. But again, it's the Democrats, so what do I know? They'll do anything.
All right, now we get to the final group, and this is the fun group, the wild cards, as I call them, the out-of-the-box candidates. And in that class, I would include Oprah Winfrey, Mark Cuban, and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who used to be a Republican, in name only, of course. That's a trio who could each do like Donald Trump and fund their own campaigns. What do you think is the likelihood any of these wild cards actually decide to run? And in this Trump era of the non-politician, might any of them be better positioned than the career politicians?
Well, they very well might. Again, the biggest problem with the Democrats is they don't have any substantial ideas to offer. So if you look at it that way, superficiality is a great way to go. Just go for someone with charisma who's been on TV like Oprah, Mark Cuban, who's basically as much as a TV reality show celebrity as he is a billionaire. They may go in that direction. I think it would be an unintentional testament to what Trump did. But what Trump did was so much more substantial. Trump had real ideas to change America, to bring America back, manufacturing jobs, appealing to the American workers in a way that Oprah Winfrey doesn't do. She'll get those blue state voters. I don't see her getting heartland voters. I don't see her appealing to those people. Mark Cuban sounds like just a fourth-rate Trump knockoff, to tell you the truth. He seems to want to emulate Trump's path to victory without having the substance that Trump had, with what Trump brought to the Republican Party. So I don't see how he's going to really stand out. Bloomberg is the one that everyone seems to think is this great candidate for some reason, and I don't see it at all. At all.
Okay, you heard it here first. I would come close to what you're saying. I think it's at least a 3 out of 4 chance that Trump gets reelected, absent, of course, any intervening events, of which there will be many if the left has their way. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Joe Schaeffer, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Up next, Say What?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network, and a shout out to the good folks listening on KEUN AM 1490 in Lafayette, Louisiana, named after the one Frenchman without whom we could not have won the American Revolution.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
Now it's time time for our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. The heat was turned up to full in the Brett Kavanaugh nomination during these last couple of weeks, with both sides outraged. Democrats that Christine Ford was not treated with the proper respect and deference. Republicans that a man they're convinced is a model citizen and judge has been forever smeared. Here are comments from Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and new rock star Candace Owens on Fox News.
It's about abortion. Does anyone really believe the story would have surfaced if Brett Kavanaugh had pledged allegiance to Roe v. Wade? Of course it wouldn't have.
The timing, suffice it to say, is curious. This all has the whiff of a political smear masquerading as a sexual assault allegation.
We have reached peak lunacy on the left. And this is, by the way, the most disgusting thing that they have done yet. Any person that actually supports sexual assault victims should be speaking out against this, because this is absolutely, as I said before, disgusting, despicable behavior.
So conservatives are inflamed at the ringer Brett Kavanaugh has been put through. But over on the left, Michael Moore may have revealed the whole truth of what the Democrats are after in all this.
Any president who is under a criminal investigation, possibly for treason, should have the right to appoint no one to any office, especially such a high office as the Supreme Court. Trump shouldn't be appointing anybody at this point anyways until Mueller has completed his investigation.
So there you go. Trump shouldn't be allowed to appoint anyone until the special counsel completes his work. And given that the average length of these special counsel or independent counsel investigations is 3 years, well, there's the bottom line. The Democrats want Trump to be impeached and removed from office, but absent that, he should be neutered. But the root of all this is the left's abject fear that Kavanaugh would try and overturn the Supreme Court decision they hold closest to their hearts, Roe versus Wade. Matthew Continetti of the Washington Free Beacon said the left has for decades been driven by abortion.
There's no question since the Bork nomination in the late 1980s that the Supreme Court has become a contested site over social issues, the life issue in particular. And that is why the debates over Republican nominees to the Supreme Court are so polarizing. And remember, just last year with Judge Gorsuch, he got through barely, right? And most likely Kavanaugh will get through with an even thinner margin this time if he does make confirmation. So it is a life issue that is driving this debate, and the liberal Democrats understand that they have been using the court for generations now to push through a liberal social agenda that they can't get through in the elected bodies of the presidency and the Congress.
Meanwhile, as top Democrats speak out on sexual misconduct claims against Brett Kavanaugh, they've been largely silent on physical and verbal harassment claims against one of their own. Keith Ellison, congressman from Minnesota and second in command, vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. Ellison's ex-girlfriend, Karen Monahan, has filed charges of domestic abuse against Ellison and says she's been smeared, threatened, and isolated from her own party. Ellison, meanwhile, offers a defense which sounds very familiar.
We were in a long-term relationship. It ended 2 years ago. 2 days before the primary, she made these allegations. They're not true. I've said that they're not true. It's an independent investigation, so I don't know.
It's not an independent investigation. It's independent by your friends and fellow party members.
No, it's an independent investigation.
That's not an independent investigation. There's documentary evidence. We have a medical record where Ms. Monahan reported to her doctor the abuse that was going on.
Physically and emotionally abused her, it says, and that she was worried that there'd be retribution if she identified you publicly.
Are you confident that no one else will step forward with any other allegations?
Look, in this political environment, I don't know what somebody might cook up.
Right. Like the rumors of Kavanaugh participating in a gang rape in college, or the flimsy story by the far-left Trump despiser Jane Mayer in The New Yorker. But when it comes to the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, crickets. As we face the midterms in just 6 weeks, the left has visions of grandeur, believing or convincing themselves of an impending blue wave that will sweep the Democrats into control of the House and maybe even the Senate, where the GOP holds the slimmest possible majority, 51-49. A real test case is the Texas Senate race, where rock-ribbed conservative Ted Cruz is defending his seat against a Bernie Sanders-style progressive Beto O'Rourke. And their exchange on the Second Amendment at a recent debate demonstrates how the two parties are about as far apart as we've ever witnessed.
You know, it was striking. He didn't dispute that he supports liberal activists who would impose the policy he wants. It's not a judge's job to impose policy. And he also didn't dispute that he wants justices that would undermine the Second Amendment.
That's not true. Of course I support the Second Amendment.
In what way, in what respect, and name one judge you've ever supported who would actually
you may not understand how the House and the Senate work, but it's your job in the Senate to decide if you're going to support or not support a given nominee.
Did you endorse Hillary Clinton?
Not in the House.
Did you endorse Hillary Clinton?
That has nothing to do with
it does, because Hillary promised every justice she would appoint would vote to overturn Hillary.
I fully support the Second Amendment.
O'Rourke is giving Cruz a run for his money, trailing narrowly with 6 weeks to go. And you can expect a whole lot more exchanges like that as Democrats are now believing that not just the House, but the Senate is in play. Meanwhile, President Trump provides our final say-what, discussing how President Obama said it would take a magic wand to bring back manufacturing jobs Obama said were lost forever. But hundreds of thousands of those jobs have been brought back since Trump took office.
We've added nearly 400,000 new manufacturing jobs, remember? You'll never have another manufacturing job, right? He's a guy. You'll never have another manufacturing job. Remember the magic wand? What, you gonna get a magic wand? Yeah, I got a magic wand.
Maybe the same magic wand he's used to reach 4% economic growth as we did in the last quarter. The Trump haters said that wasn't possible either. Up next, Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner. An alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Without the liberal bias. LN Radio. Syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV. The right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast. Fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
Truth
is making a comeback.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Just talking loud. Just saying nothing.
Well, you would think that the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh and the women who've come forward and Rod Rosenstein at the Department of Justice are the only things going on in the world. But in fact, there are threats and some promising developments regarding your individual liberty, which we're going to discuss now with Scott Cosenza, our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. And Scott, we're going to talk Supreme Court to start out, but we probably won't even mention Brett Kavanaugh, because
you shouldn't have said it. People are already clicking off.
There's a lot of business that has to come before the court.
October 1 is the start of the Supreme Court session. They are the third branch of government, and they will make decisions that are consequential to all of our lives, of course. That is why people are fighting so hard. We will examine the court's future term. They start October 1. They have accepted, Tim, so far 38 cases to hear. It will be an 8-justice bench if no successor to the retired Justice Kennedy has been sworn in by that date.
And we saw that before when Antonin Scalia died and left 8 justices on the court for a period of several months. And we got a whole bunch of 4-4 decisions.
And some will have to be re-argued, unfortunately. I have a lot of pity, Tim, for the for the lawyers involved, although maybe they'll see it as a chance to, second bite at the apple. We'll see if they have to re-argue. But some of the big cases we're looking at, Tim, are there is an Eighth Amendment case about whether or not large fines that are prohibited under the Eighth Amendment by the federal government issuing prohibitively large fines, if that applies to the state government.
Explain the Eighth Amendment.
Well, cruel and unusual punishment and excessive fines are not allowed under the Eighth Amendment. And so, for instance, there was a case that I remember reading. I thought it was particularly fantastic with respect to the federal government's role in outsized fines. There was, there's a rule that if you travel outside the country with more than, I think it's $10,000, they changed the number, I think, but you're required to report that in certain instances. Well, the federal government had said in one instance that the fine for not reporting it should be the amount that you didn't disclose. So they had a case where a guy who didn't disclose that he was traveling with over $100,000 in cash, who was not alleged to have been, by the way, some nefarious type. I think he was just a foreign national who had his money in cash because of where he was going.
Right.
And he declined to report it because who wants to tell the government their business? They said that the appropriate penalty should be for him to forfeit that six-figure plus sum. And the court said, absolutely not. That's an excessive fine. He should be fined like anybody. If you had $10,001 and didn't report it, the fine should be the same. It's a non-reporting fine. There is no currently recognized by the Supreme Court prohibition on state governments for doing so. So that's what this case will resolve. Another big case is a case called Gamble, which will look at whether or not the Constitution's protection on double jeopardy, which is to be tried twice for the same crime or put in jeopardy twice for the same crime, applies also to people who are tried at the federal level and the state level. And the current rule on this is that you can be tried twice. Right now, you can be tried at the state level or the federal level. Perhaps one of the most famous examples, for at least people who are old enough to remember of this, was the Rodney King, the police officers involved in the Rodney King beating. They were tried by state court in California. They were acquitted by that Simi Valley jury that got so much attention for acquitting those officers. And then George Bush and the federal government prosecuted them federally for violating the civil rights of Rodney King. So this Mr. Gamble says, hey, this prohibition of double jeopardy in the Constitution should be recognized to cover state crimes. And it's interesting, Tim, because, of course, when the country was founded, the only federal crimes were piracy on the high seas, counterfeiting, and treason, I think, are the three. So,
and now there's so many that they can't even literally be counted. In other words,
as you say,
many attempts have been made to quantify the number of federal laws, but they've all failed for one reason or another, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's not even just the laws. How about the laws that attach criminal penalty to acting outside them? They can't even tell us that. So I think that actually would be a pro-freedom move if it came out. Right now, it just seems... It seems like it goes against, because one of the things that it does is it allows the government, whether that government is the federal government or the state government, to then apply their unlimited resources to the defense that you brought up at your first trial. And that's seen as unfair, which is why it's prohibited in the Constitution in the first place. So, and a third case that I think has the potential to be huge, Tim, is a case called Gundy. And it has the potential to be huge because it addresses the delegation doctrine, which is that Congress often passes sort of an idea about a law. It says we should prohibit, and the law in this instance has to deal with sex offender registration. Mr. Gundy was convicted of a crime which required sex offender registration after his conviction was entered. So as you may imagine and know now, if you are convicted of a sex crime, you have to register with every person you see, basically, as you go and leave the house, right? You have to say, I'm a sex offender where you work, where you live, where you commute, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't the case years ago. And so if you were convicted years ago, are you now subject to these new penalties? So the specifics of the case aside, though, Tim, I think it's very important, if it were to go the way that a lot of libertarian jurists would like, which is to say that the delegation doctrine is not appropriate, it's not constitutional. If Congress wishes to pass a law, they need to pass the specifics of that law. And what they do often, and what they've done here, Tim, is said, you, Justice Department, or you, federal agency, often under the executive, you write the rules. Well, those rules are actually laws. And the Supreme Court, with kind of a wink and a nod, has gone on with that in the past. But there's a movement afoot to reverse that and to require Congress to actually legislate with specificity.
Now, how many of these cases would you say hang on whether there's a conservative majority or if it's 4-4? In other words, how much difference do you believe a Kavanaugh vote or a conservative jurist vote would make in these cases?
When he resigned from the court at this table, you said to the people that Kennedy had become the new swing vote. Mm-hmm. That's your answer right there, isn't it?
All right, let's move on from the court to Philadelphia forfeiture machine killed as the city officials agreed to a set of reforms that will end the perverse financial incentives under which law enforcement keeps and uses civil asset forfeiture revenue. This is a big issue that often flies under the radar.
It's huge. The Institute for Justice, people who helmed this case, are heroes without capes, Tim. They are really... They've done as much for liberty here for the citizens of Philadelphia, probably more than anybody since perhaps Ben Franklin.
That's a long time.
The Democrat-controlled courts and prosecutorial staff and mayor's office and police departments and everybody in Philadelphia who, for generations, unfortunately, they created a system that was so corrupt. I'm going to read you now from the Institute for Justice, where they say, courtroom 478, where all the hearings, quote-unquote hearings, were held, were run entirely by prosecutors without any judges or court-appointed lawyers to defend property owners. Again and again, prosecutors demanded that property owners appear in court sometimes 10 times or more, and missing even a single meeting could mean you lose your house. And so here's what they did. This family, Sorovelis family, their kid was selling some drugs. He got busted, $40 worth of drugs. They didn't know there was any attempt to seize their house. Literally, one day, government agents came and literally removed them from your house. I mean, think about this. You're watching the ball game, right? You got your ham sandwich in front of you, and government people, like 6 months ago, your kid got caught selling a bag of weed, and government agents now say that house is now theirs because you missed some hearing you didn't even know about. Wow. That's the level of protection there was in Philadelphia. To say that there was none, it was. I thought, I mean, really, it was quite shocking, and it must be quite shocking, Tim, because how the change was made was not through a democratic process. In other words, it wasn't like the citizens of Philadelphia voted. The DA, Lawrence Krasner, who is remarkably, and I hesitate to use the word because I know it bristles you and others, progressive, meaning he is for not, way left Democrat things, but really like what can we do to move the ball forward on justice and this and other measures. And the credit goes to Mr. Krasner and these Institute for Justice lawyers for changing the way that Philadelphia does it. And also, and I haven't gotten through all the entirety of the settlement agreement. This came as a settlement agreement. The family had sued Philadelphia, and so they agreed to not only give the Sorovelis family their house back, but for the future, Tim, all Philadelphians will now benefit from changes in the system that the DA has instituted. And also there's a big fund for people who've been wronged in the past to now apply. So go ahead, if you went through Philly and they stole your car under some forfeiture thing, go check the website. You may be entitled to get some gas.
Get in line.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.